Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an article from the front page of the Delhi edition. See, today we have 4 to 5 articles in the paper that are related to the upcoming climate change summit, which is all set to be held in a couple of days at Glasgow in the United Kingdom. So let's club all these articles together and understand India's top priorities as India faces a tough challenge at the upcoming climate change summit. Parallelly, there is also the G20 summit being held in Italy. And to participate in these two high profile events, the Prime Minister of India has already taken off along with the Environment Minister. So, in this context, we shall examine India's top priorities and challenges at the Climate Change Summit and as well as at G20. And we shall also talk about the key outcomes that India is trying to achieve. See, prior to their travel to these two important summits, the Environment Minister and the Prime Minister of India have clearly outlined India's two top priorities by keeping in mind India's national interests. The first priority for the Indian government would be to ensure that the principle of climate justice is upheld and protected at the Climate Change Summit. Climate justice essentially refers to the CBDR principle or common but differentiated responsibilities which India has always championed at the Climate Change Convention. It basically refers to the common goal of combating climate change. But however, the responsibilities to be taken up by the countries cannot be the same because countries like India are not responsible largely for historical emissions. And we don't owe any historical responsibilities like the developed and industrialized nations. Hence, India has always believed that fighting climate change should be a common goal, a common objective, but the responsibilities has to be differentiated on the basis of each country's historical emissions. Now, for India, CBDR and climate justice is the top focus and the top priority because over the last few months, India is being brought under tremendous pressure to adopt the target of net zero emissions with a strict deadline. The other top emitters of the world, such as United States, European Union, and China, they have all taken up net zero emission targets. And US and European Union have declared that by 2050, they are going to achieve net zero emissions, whereas China has set a deadline of 2060 for itself. So now, they are targeting India and putting enormous pressure on India to accept the same targets, as India happens to be the third largest emitter. But however, based on India's firm belief in the principle of CBDR and climate justice, India doesn't want to be pushed into accepting such unnecessary deadlines. And India has made it very clear that as of now, India is not going to take up any net zero emissions target. Because India on its own has been taking several actions in order to genuinely achieve its targets, which have been announced under the Paris Agreement of 2015, which are known as intended nationally determined contributions. These are voluntary targets that countries have taken up under the Paris Agreement, and India is one amongst the few countries which is genuinely striving to achieve these voluntarily declared targets. As per these targets that India has committed to, it is already well on its way to achieve an installed capacity of renewable energy of 450 gigawatts by 2030, along with significantly enhancing its forest cover to create more carbon sinks in order to promote carbon capture and sequestration. And India is also proactively taking mitigation measures in order to bring down its overall emissions and emissions intensity. In line with these objectives, India has also launched an ambitious electric vehicles policy in order to achieve one of the world's biggest transformation from fossil fuel driven vehicles towards electric and hybrid vehicles. Recently, India has also come out with the National Hydrogen Mission, which focuses on exploiting the potential of green hydrogen to tackle emissions. So, with India making these genuine contributions in the global fight against climate change, it feels that it shouldn't be rushed or pressurized by any other country to accept net zero emission targets with a strict deadline, as it would end up compromising India's development agenda. As India isn't responsible for historical emissions, we want the other developed and industrialized nations to follow the principle of climate justice and CBDR and give India the space it requires to strike a balance between economic development and bringing down emissions. So, apart from this, the second top priority for India would be to push the developed countries to live up to their commitments with regard to transfer of finance and technology to the developing nations. In previous summits of the Climate Change Convention, the developed nations had committed to start arranging $100 billion in finance every year from 2020 onwards. But this commitment is yet to be delivered by the developed nations. So India would be looking to push the developed nations to first fulfill their commitments with regard to climate finance and transfer of technology to the developing nations so that they could start adopting the mitigation and adaptation measures. Then it should also be noted that apart from these domestic efforts, India has also been making global efforts to help the world fight against the disastrous impact of climate change and to adopt a definitive shift towards renewable energy in order to end our dependency on fossil fuels and to drive down emissions. If you remember, at the Paris Summit of 2015, India, along with France, launched the ambitious International Solar Alliance. And today, more than 120 countries are taking part under this initiative to promote the adoption of solar energy. And under India's leadership, it is seen to be driving the One Sun, One Earth, One Grid initiative to promote the global adoption of solar renewables so that we can assist the other countries, especially the smaller developing nations and the underdeveloped countries, to bring down their respective emissions by switching from fossil fuels towards solar power. Plus, India has also launched the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, through which India is helping several other countries in adaptation measures such as the creation of disaster resilient infrastructure, which would help in shielding the vulnerable nations and vulnerable communities from the disastrous impact of extreme weather events, which are being driven as a direct consequence of climate change and global warming. So, if the International Solar Alliance is a mitigation initiative designed to bring down emissions and promote adoption of solar, then the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure is an adaptation initiative being sponsored and supported by India. Under the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, India is also planning to announce a new major initiative while it participates at the 26th Conference of Parties to the Climate Change Convention. India, United Kingdom, and Australia are coming together to launch a new global initiative under CDRI known as Infrastructure for Resilient Island States. Under this initiative, India, United Kingdom, and Australia are going to contribute nearly $10 million each between the period 2022 to 2030 to help finance the creation of disaster resilient infrastructure in the small island states. See, across the major oceans, be it the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, or the Atlantic, there are several small island states such as the Caribbean countries, the Polynesian countries, the small Indian Ocean states, and these are the small island states which are the most vulnerable to the impact of rising sea levels as a result of climate change and global warming. So, as these small island states face a greater risk, India, UK, and Australia are putting together this initiative under the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure so that we can help these small island countries adapt to the reality of climate change. So, all these domestic and global initiatives being taken up by India shows India's seriousness towards combating climate change and the commitment that it has displayed towards promoting global cooperation in adaptation and mitigation measures. Hence, India rightfully believes that it can't be pressurized by the developed nations to adopt the net zero emissions target. And these are the top priorities and the outcomes that the Indian delegation would be pushing for. Then the Prime Minister, before traveling to the United Kingdom for the Climate Change Summit, will be traveling to Italy to take part in the G20 summit. During this visit, the Prime Minister is expected to meet the Pope to step up relations between India and the Vatican and will also interact with several global leaders who will take part in the G20 summit. The G20 grouping brings together the 20 largest economies of the world, And India is looking to urge these countries to work together to promote better international financial management, as the current global financial architecture is unsuitable for guaranteeing economic stability, especially at a time when the pandemic has caused a major economic disruption. So, India will be pushing for better international financial management and even reforms to global financial institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF. Apart from this, India would also like to focus on anti corruption and anti money laundering measures because it currently holds the co chair to the anti corruption working group of the G20 along with Italy. So, India would like to make use of this opportunity and work with the other co chair, that is Italy, to promote the adoption of anti corruption and anti money laundering measures by the G20 nations. Then finally, the G20 will also take stock of certain important global developments, including the current situation in Afghanistan and the challenges created by the pandemic. The G20 is likely to hold a discussion on UNSC Resolution 2593, which mandates the Taliban, which is currently in power in Afghanistan, to provide for the formation of an inclusive government by respecting human rights and the rights of minorities and women. So, India would definitely make use of the platform to further push for the adoption of the UNSC Resolution 2593 by the Taliban in Afghanistan. Then it is also being reported that the G20 is trying to work out a framework or a mechanism to prevent the breakout of future pandemics. The G20 is looking to draw lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic, and by studying its origins, it is looking to create an effective global mechanism so that there would be global cooperation to prevent the breakout of any future pandemics. So, with these key objectives and priorities in mind, the Prime Minister and the Union Environment Minister have set out to participate in these two important summits. On page number 8, we also have a related editorial which highlights the tremendous global pressure on India to adopt the net zero emission targets. The editorial agrees with the decision of the Indian government to not take up net zero emission targets as of now because India has every right to demand more space in the global carbon budget that is left. The carbon budget is nothing but the amount of emissions that the world is allowed to release without breaching the Paris target of keeping the global rise in temperatures to under 2 degrees Celsius or if possible under 1.5 degrees Celsius. So if the world is not to breach this target, then there is a maximum emission cap which is referred to as the carbon budget of the world. According to scientific assessments carried out by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the world can afford to release another 420 to 580 gigatons of carbon dioxide, and anything beyond this, we will be breaching the Paris target, and the global temperatures are going to rise beyond 1.5 and beyond 2 degrees Celsius. So, this is the remaining carbon budget of the world, and as a developing nation, India would want more space in the carbon budget, which has already been consumed by developed and industrialized nations like US, European Union, and China. While these countries have achieved tremendous development and progress by freely burning fossil fuels for decades and centuries together, India would want to hold them accountable for their historical emissions. And India would like to contribute to the global climate action efforts at a pace that it is comfortable with. And hence, it doesn't want to be forced by the other countries to accept the net zero emission targets. So, to make this argument, India is going to rely upon three important factors which define India's developmental priorities and India's emissions history. See, as we have been discussing, India is not really responsible for the climate crisis because our historical emissions have been very low. Then, as a developing nation, India is facing tremendous socio-economic challenges. And to address this challenge of underdevelopment, we need to promote rapid economic growth. And this would require India to continue burning fossil fuels, at least for a while, even as we parallelly adopt the switch to renewables. Then India is also going to rely upon the fact that it still has one of the world's lowest per capita emissions, despite being the third largest emitting country. India's per capita emissions are extremely low when compared to top polluters like US and China, and hence India feels that it has every right to demand more space in the remaining global carbon budget so that we can achieve our developmental priorities while we parallelly pursue our climate action targets. While the editorial appreciates the stand being taken by India, it also points out that this is a minimalist approach that India is adopting. Because India is going into the summit by assuming that these minimal measures are sufficient to shield India against extreme weather events and to protect India against this global pressure. According to the editorial, India's current approach is very minimalist because it is entirely focused on just bringing down fossil fuel emissions by adopting more renewables, and it is trying to push back against global pressure by highlighting the principle of climate justice and CBDR. But the editorial argues that this approach may not be sufficient because one, India is already being affected by extreme weather events such as increasing floods, heavy rainfall, droughts, and even by increasing frequency and intensity of cyclones. So, to first shield ourselves from the disastrous impact of climate change, India should be doing more, according to the article. That this minimalist approach may not be sufficient to push back against global pressure of adopting net zero emission targets. Hence, it is calling upon India to adopt a slightly different strategy. The editorial agrees that it is the right thing to do for India to avoid the net zero emission deadline that is being pushed upon India. India is also doing the right thing by reminding the developed countries of their failed promises and commitments, and hence we are correctly pushing them to arrange for the climate finance that they had promised. India would bring up this issue and demand the developed nations to start raising $100 billion in finance every year for the developing nations. And it will also be seeking the transfer of technology so that cleaner and renewable sources of energy could be adopted by the developing and underdeveloped nations as well. But apart from these measures, the editorial says that India will have to adopt a multi-sectoral energy transition plan in order to push up its domestic efforts and also to showcase to the world that we are doing enough to achieve the Paris goal of keeping global rise in temperatures to under 1.5 degrees Celsius. For this, India will have to come up with a domestic technological policy which will clearly outline the socio-economic objectives that we are trying to achieve and the way in which we are going to finance our development, especially the way in which we are going to secure our energy security and the technologies that we are going to rely upon to achieve this energy security. So if India comes out with such an energy transition plan that applies for multiple sectors and clearly outlines the technologies it is going to adopt and how it is going to raise finance to meet these socio-economic objectives, then we can not only help India shield itself against the impact of extreme weather events, but we can also use this as a solid argument to ward off global pressure from the other countries. The editorial argues that India actually stands to gain by adopting such a clear-cut policy towards energy transition. And apart from the appreciable efforts that we are currently taking up, we need to draw up such medium-term and long-term plans by putting in place a concrete energy transition plan. Such a plan would help our own adaptation and mitigation measures to first protect our own vulnerable communities against the impact of these extreme weather events. And it would also provide India a strong argument at these global summits to fight back against global pressure. Now let's take up a column from page number 9, which examines whether the NDPS Act should be amended. See, just a few days back, we had discussed some of the controversial provisions in the NDPS Act. The NDPS Act is very much in news because of few recent high-profile cases involving drugs and psychotropic substances. The Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act was brought out in 1985 to tackle the drug menace in the country, and it not only established the Narcotics Control Bureau for this purpose, but it also adopted several guidelines prescribed under relevant UN conventions on narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances. But however, in the operation and implementation of the law, several challenges and gaps have emerged, thus leading experts to question whether the law should be amended to strengthen India's fight against the drug menace. In fact, the Union Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment has even recently proposed to amend the law. And as per the proposal, the ministry is looking to decriminalize the possession of narcotic drugs in smaller quantities for personal purposes. There is also a suggestion that people who are consuming drugs in smaller quantities for recreation should be treated as victims of drug abuse and they should not be treated as criminals under the law. So these proposals have been brought up by the Union Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. And in this context, the Hindu carries an interview with two leading experts, including a police officer and a civil society expert, who have considerable experience in tackling the drug menace in order to generate their opinion on this key topic. See, the production, supply, trafficking, and consumption of drugs is definitely a social menace, especially to the youth of the society, and it is also a national security threat at the same time. But however, a law that deals with drug menace has to create a distinction between these two types of threats. The current version of the law provides very stringent provisions, which includes a strict jail term for not just those who are producing drugs and trafficking drugs, but also for the end user who might very well be a victim of drug abuse. The law even provides for death penalty in extreme cases and for repeat offenders, and it is excessively focused on the security threat alone, while it doesn't provide enough attention to the social menace that drugs are causing. See, when it comes to drugs consumption and the types of drugs, they are usually classified into three types. First is the party drugs, such as heroin, cocaine, meth, etc., which happen to be very expensive, and those who consume them often belong to the upper rich class. The second category is prescription drugs, which could include something as simple as a cough syrup or a vapor rub, and often people from the middle classes get addicted to such prescription drugs as well. The experts point out that there are addicts who are known to consume a variety of prescription drugs and tablets, as it tends to give them a momentary high. Then the third category is inhalants, which includes a list of synthetic chemicals, which are very cheaply available in the form of whiteners, paint thinners, and other synthetic chemicals. These cheap inhalant drugs are often consumed by street children as they cannot afford the other expensive drugs. All these category of drugs pose a different degree of threat, and hence a law which is combating drug menace cannot simply treat all the drug users and victims as the same, and it definitely cannot equate them with the drug producers and traffickers. But unfortunately, this is what the NDPS Act does. It provides for very strict police action against the drug users as well, and quite often the drug users are not treated as victims of abuse, but instead they're often equated with the producers and traffickers and suppliers. So there is often criticism against the Act that the police generally adopt a practice where they first simply arrest the accused and then investigate the case. This is said to be a result of the stringent provisions which equates the drug users with the drug traffickers. So the experts acknowledge that this is true to an extent, but however, there are certain checks and balances in the law to ensure that due process is followed while drugs are being seized and while the accused are being arrested. This due process requires the authorities to seize drugs and arrest the accused in front of magistrates and to seek appropriate permissions from them. But the tendency of the police and the officials to first arrest the accused and then investigate has even given rise to assumption that the law is being misused for political gains, to target high-profile personalities in order to turn it into a sensational news, to divert national attention from political issues. But however, the experts feel that the chances of such misuse of law is very low, as there are sufficient checks and balances involved in the arrest and investigation process. But they do acknowledge the current inadequacies in the law, because when you're looking at the drug menace from a security angle, you need to consider the fact that production and trafficking of drugs has interstate ramifications and as well as transnational ramifications. The production, supply, and trafficking of drugs is essentially a organized crime, and quite often drugs are smuggled into the country by violating our borders. And drug trafficking is often linked very closely with terrorism, insurgency, and money laundering. So, keeping this in mind, it's very essential to treat drug production and drug trafficking as a national security threat. But since the law doesn't create a distinction between the producers and traffickers and the drug users, even the drug users who happen to be just end consumers, even they end up facing the strict provisions of the law. This is where the experts feel that the law has to be amended to provide a clear distinction between the drug producers and traffickers, where we approach the issue from a national security angle by treating it as an organized crime and provide separate provisions to deal with drug abuse and drug addiction. Then, upon this, under the current provisions, there are several delays in court procedures, which drags the case for years together, and hence justice is not really served to the perpetrators. So, it is in this context that the latest proposal of the Union Ministry acquires a lot of importance because the Social Justice Ministry has proposed to treat the drug users as a separate category, and it is looking to decriminalize the possession of drugs in smaller quantities. But if this has to be done, then there has to be a lot of focus on rehabilitation to help out the victims of drug abuse and substance abuse. And for such rehabilitation, the government will have to set up sufficient counseling infrastructure by creating the required facilities and by providing them with psychiatrists and counselors. The current version of the law doesn't have enough provisions for this, and there is no provision even for a rehabilitation fund. So, if the law has to be amended, the government can consider establishing a rehabilitation fund through which sufficient finances could be provided for establishing these rehab centers and de-addiction centers so that the victims of drug abuse, that is the drug users, can be provided the right kind of counseling in order to bring them back into the mainstream instead of treating them as criminals and instead of equating them with drug producers and traffickers. This is where the writers refer to an example by taking up the country of Iceland as a case study. See, at one point, the country of Iceland was affected by acute drug abuse, especially amongst the young. But the government of Iceland successfully has tackled the issue by adopting a community-led approach, beginning right from school, where parents, teachers, and the civil society have been given an important role to check drug abuse amongst the youth and children. And by focusing on rehabilitation and reformation, Iceland has significantly brought down the consumption of drugs, thereby destroying the drug market itself. So that is a model which could be followed in India as well, where we have very strict provisions for drug producers and traffickers and approach the issue from a security point of view. But at the same time, treat the drug users as victims of drug abuse and provide them a rehabilitative, reformative approach by involving the community, that is the parents, the teachers, and the civil society, so that an opportunity could be given to the drug users to undergo de-addiction. Then comes the debate between legalization of drugs and decriminalization of drugs. See, for example, in the United States, a few states have introduced laws which has legalized the consumption of drugs for recreation and in smaller quantities. But the experts feel that the Indian society is not ready for such a transition because legalization of drugs would create many more challenges to both social stability and as well as to security in the country. Legalization might actually drive up the consumption of drugs and could lead to several other associated crimes, which could end up creating an even bigger challenge. So, according to the experts, instead of pursuing legalization of drugs, India should focus on decriminalization so that those who are consuming drugs in smaller quantities, those who have been misled, they need not be treated as criminals. Instead, they could be treated as victims who require rehabilitation and counseling. So this is one key amendment that the lawmakers should focus upon so that all the category of drug consumers, be it those from the upper class or be it just street children, they all receive the same care and attention through professionals and experts who could help them through their de-addiction process. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: examine India's emphasis on climate justice and on exhorting developed countries to transfer the finance and technology that is necessary to deal with the fallout of global warming during the recent climate change summit. The second question: should the NDPS Act of 1985 be amended? Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which the link shall be given in the description box. So let's conclude the discussion for today. Thanks for watching.